The literature review. This is where you sketch the overall landscape of related work in the field. Now, you will have done a lot of reading of the literature when you did your proposal and selected your topic. And chances are that's what got you interested in your topic in the first place. So now, even though you've done a brief literature review in your proposal, you now need to provide a fully updated and extended version of that in the final report. Your examiner won't have read your proposal, so they won't have the same context of that relevant literature. And to be honest, you can reuse much of what you did for your proposal, but you may also have missed some relevant work that you should then make sure you add in and cover as well. Another important point about writing your literature review in the final report is that once you get to the end of your study, you have become an expert in that very specific area. So your academic writing voice should become a lot more confident than it was at the beginning when you did your proposal. And that was when you were just starting out and exploring the existing research. Now, from an examiner's point of view, they will be an expert in the field and they will know the other experts and who is well respected in terms of which other studies you quote. And it's highly likely that you will even reference one of your external examiners, even though you might not be aware of it at the time. So the way to approach your literature review is to have some lines of inquiry that ultimately converge on your exact topic. Think about it like a Venn diagram of a number of circles that overlap in the middle. In order to fully understand the narrow, specific topic that you have researched, your reader needs to have the broader overview and then understand how all these different circles of areas in the literature overlap and intersect. So, at the beginning of your literature review, introduce these lines of inquiry or the main focus areas of your literature review. And this then introduces the subsections where you will go into more detail for each one of these. Now, what I found challenging was the sequence in which I took my reader through these main areas. And you should be able to move your subsections around in your literature review. So when you write them, make sure they are self-contained, that they aren't too tightly integrated with each other. And that means that if you need to move a few paragraphs around to change the sequence and reorder them, you can do that fairly easily. And ultimately, you want to start as broadly as possible and then narrow down towards the end of your literature review section. So the way I decided on the sequence in my literature review was to start with discussing the papers in the literature that were most relevant to the end of my introduction. So now a reader will have finished the introduction, and then it's quite important to create a bridge or some continuity into the next section. So as soon as they got into my literature review, I ensured that the papers I discussed at the beginning of my literature review were quite relevant to where I'd finished off in my introduction. Then each subsection of your literature review must really demonstrate your ability to critically engage with other research. This comes with practice, and it is tough initially, but just do it and you'll get better and better. So the language and the writing approach for a literature review is very important. Once again, you must not show any bias on your part as a researcher. You must let the other work speak for itself. But you certainly can start demonstrating how other work supports the problems you've introduced and therefore justifies the research questions you have set out to answer. Start bringing in that conflict and those problems and research questions. Just gently introduce them as you allow those papers and the other literature to come through in this section of your final report. And the last subsection of your literature review should be on the topic that most relies on all the other previous work. It's that one subsection that can be read, it has to be read with the context of all the other areas. It's the one that can least be read in isolation of those other areas. And then once again, it's almost funneling your reader through into the next section of your final report. So make sure that there is some continuity with the next one based on the last line of inquiry or subsection of your literature review. And very importantly, you must also demonstrate that there is a gap in the research, which you will aim to address with your study. At the end of your literature review, you should have a conclusion which summarizes all the studies you referenced. And I found this quite hard to write, as you have to effectively distill a massive amount of your own reading right down to only what's absolutely relevant for your study. And I'll show you that once again in my own literature review, but without missing any specific thing at that level that an expert might be looking for. So, as I've mentioned, I've included a demonstration lesson that shows you my own literature review from my dissertation so that you can get an idea of exactly how I handled it and what this looks like in a real life example.